interrupt this program to give you a bulletin just received from one of our naval units at sea. A large object traveling at supersonic speed is headed over the North Atlantic toward the east coast of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Drew Pearson. We bring you this special radio television broadcast in order to give you the very latest information on an amazing phenomenon, the arrival of a space ship in Washington. The Army has taken every precaution to meet any emergency which may develop. Just a minute, ladies and gentlemen, I think something is happening.
I came here to give you these facts. But if you threaten to extend your violence, this earth of yours will be reduced to a burned-out cinder.
Thank you very much. I think there were 9 members of Congress and 3 Russians and a personal representative of Slobodan Milosevic. We were sitting in a hotel room in Vienna, Austria in '99. It was during the Kosovo conflict. Jesse Jackson was in Belgrade. I remember our Secretary of State was aghast when there was a photograph of Jesse Jackson standing in a circle holding hands with Slobodan Milosevic in prayer. We were there developing a framework agreement which the G8 about a week later adopted to end the Kosovo conflict. The senior Russian there was Vladimir Lukin, who was the ambassador here at the end of Bush and the beginning of Clinton, the end of Bush 1, beginning of Clinton. He was, at that time, he was the chair of their international relations, the equivalent of international relations committee in the Russian Duma. He was very angry. He sat in that hotel room, little short fellow with his arms folded over his chest looking at the ceiling for 2 days. And he said, you spit on us, now why should we help you? The only country that had the real confidence of Yugoslavia was Russia. And what we had told them was the Soviet Union had collapsed. And we're the big guys now, we'll take care of this, thank you. And that was his reference to, you spit on us, now why should we help you? Because we had come to the Russians to help us with a negotiated settlement to the Kosovo conflict. And finally, after 2 days there, Vladimir Lukin spoke up. He said, if we really wanted to hurt you, with no fear of retaliation, we'd launch an SLBM, we'd shut down your grid, your communications, and your grid for 6 months or so. The third-ranking communist was there, Alexander Shabanov, a tall, handsome, blonde Russian. And he smiled and said, and if one weapon won't do it, we have some spares. I think at that time they had something like 10,000 spares. What was he talking about? Oh, by the way, Kurt Weldon was there, and Kurt spoke Russian. He said, did you hear what he said? Well, of course I heard it, but I didn't understand a thing he said until it was translated. What was he talking about? Something that would shut down our power grid, our communications for 6 months or so. And there'd be no fear of retaliation. SLBM, it's launched from the sea. Who would know where it came from if it was launched from the sea? He was talking, of course, about EMP, electromagnetic pulse. It's an inevitable accompaniment of any nuclear detonation above the atmosphere. Any nuclear weapon detonated above the atmosphere will produce an EMP pulse. Our only real-life experience with that was, what, in 1962, Starfish Prime, Johnston Island. Hawaii, 800 miles away, not much microelectronics. Hawaii, 800 miles away, had some pretty serious consequences of this, of the atmosphere detonation. The Soviets had a lot more experience than we, real-life experience with it. We had a number of simulations, but it's just very difficult to simulate the long line effects. What is this EMP, electromagnetic pulse? It has three phases. The first one is different than anything we have experienced. It goes right through your surge protector. The rise time is in nanoseconds, and it's through the surge protector before the surge protector sees it. And then there's an E2 and 3, and the 3 is really something that we have very little experience with. It's very long wavelengths that will couple with wires buried under the ground. It lasts for several, and I told her, well, gee, not 1 in 50 Americans may know about EMP, but I will tell you that 100% of our potential enemies know all about EMP. And to convince the audience is that true, I have a chart which I use, and it's in Russian, and it shows in pictorial form a nuclear detonation and the EMP and power lines sparking and everything going out. So obviously they know about it. It's in all of the open literature of any of our potential enemies. It's in all of their war games. It's a very early event in all of the war games because it is so asymmetric. I guess it's been a couple of years or so ago now that Dr. McClellan was in my office. He is the head of the Office of Reliability in FERC. And he said that when we have the next Carrington event is a super solar storm. The last one occurred in 1859. There was not much electronics of any kind then. We had Morse code things. They caught on fire. This was a really big solar storm. A British scientist by the name of Dr. Carrington described the event, and so it's known by his name. It's not if, it's when there is another Carrington event. And Dr. McClellan said that the grid would come down. We would destroy or damage 300 of our big transformers. We don't make them. You order them, and they will make them for you, and it takes, what, a year and a half, 2 years. He said the grid would be down from 2 to 4 years in the event of a major solar storm. That's not an if, that's a when, because there will be another major solar storm. The next cycle is, what, 12 and 13. So it's starting next year. There's going to be another major solar maximum. So we'll see what
Hello, this is Dr. C. Alex Young with NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center and the Sun Today. It's June 7th, 2011. I woke up this morning to an email from a colleague of mine at helioviewer.org that said, "Never seen anything like this before, spectacular." And I can't think of any better way to describe this event. This morning at around 7 UT Universal Time, over a period of maybe 3 hours or so, the sun produced a quite spectacular prominence eruption that had a solar flare and high energy particles associated with it. But I've just never seen material released like this before, such huge amount, and then fall back down in quite the spectacular way. You can see a wave coming, there's the flash, and all of this dark, relatively cool material compared to the corona falling back down on the sun. You see it brighten up as it hits the solar surface, and in some places you can even see it appears to get sucked back in because it's magnetic and it's being attracted into the areas of intense magnetic field called sunspots or active regions.
You know, there's a general understanding that if it's too good to be true, it's maybe not true, probably not true. And EMP just seems too bad to be true. So therefore it's relegated kind of to the fringes, and why would we want to talk about that? Because it is so improbable. I started these few moments we had together by using the comments of Vladimir Lukin. If we really wanted to hurt you with no possibility of any revenge, because you wouldn't know who did it, we'd launch an SLBM. By the way, it doesn't even take a state actor to do this. It could be a non-state actor. A single weapon detonated 300 miles high over Iowa or Nebraska will blanket our whole country. The Russian generals told the EMP Commission that the Soviets had developed, and they had enhanced EMP weapons that produced 200 kilovolts per meter. That's 100 kilovolts per meter at the margins of our country, Northwest Washington and Miami. We have never made or tested anything anywhere near 100 kilovolts per meter. It takes out all of our microelectronics, all of the SCADA units that control the distribution of power. I don't know how, if you have been to a manufacturing plant where they manufacture these microelectronics. I was kind of fascinated when I visited there. It was mostly women doing the work, by the way, and men and women are different. Our military has a little trouble understanding that sometimes, I think, but they are different. And women are superior in some things, and in manufacturing microelectronics they must be superior because they're almost all women. But I looked down and they had a steel bracelet, anklet on, and it was tied to the floor. And the reason is that these microelectronics are so sensitive that the static electricity that you develop just when you move your clothing produces enough static electricity that you could damage these microelectronics. Well, we harden them a bit so they can bounce around in your car, and you can drop your cell phone a bit and so forth. But they are exquisitely sensitive to these EMP waves. I don't know how I first heard about EMP, but when I became aware that there was such a phenomenon, I called my friend Tom Clancy, who has done a couple of fundraisers for me. And Tom, I knew, did very good research, and he had an EMP scenario in one of his books, and so I asked him if he would talk to me about EMP. Well, he said, if you read my book, you know all I know about EMP. And he said, let me refer you to the smartest man hired by the U.S. government. That's a pretty big order, isn't it? Because we hire a lot of people. And from his perspective, the smartest man hired by the U.S. government was a Dr. Lowell Wood. And so I got Dr. Lowell Wood's, Lawrence Livermore, I got Dr. Lowell Wood's page. We didn't have any cell phones, and this was pre-cell phone. And I got his paging number, and I paged him, and I thought he was in California. It goes up to a satellite and down. It came down to his pager in Washington, D.C., so within an hour, Lowell Wood was sitting in my office. Lowell's assessment of the problem that we face in preparing hardening against an EMP is that it's just too hard. We're not going to worry about that. Scarlett O'Hara will worry about that tomorrow. And that's where we generally are. We just passed a bill. We had a good bill come out of the House, and it had hardening of the grid against a cyber, and that could bring down the grid. There are three things that could bring down the grid. A cyber attack with cascading effects that would blow the big transformers could bring down the grid. A Carrington event will bring down the grid, and an EMP can bring down the grid. I mentioned that it doesn't need to be a state actor. A tramp steamer, a Scud launcher, which you can buy for $100,000 on the open market, and any crude nuclear weapon. Scud of apogee, what, about 180 miles? That's not high enough, or it can't go far enough to shut down our whole country, but it certainly could take out all of New England, couldn't it? That would be Katrina, what, 10 times over? At least 10 times over. By the way, both of these novels, and I would recommend that you get them and read them, 1 Second After and The Satan Legacy. The Satan Legacy was the SA-18, the big Soviet missile that had 10 warheads on it. And in his story, one of those disappears when they're moving them from Ukraine to Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed. And 3 of those warheads are used in this attack, and they're launched from the Caribbean, and we're watching and we see those things, and gee, where are they going to land? Well, one of them is landing in the Atlantic, the other's landing in the Pacific, and the third one is landing in northern Canada. Well, where are they at apogee? At apogee, they're right across the United States. This is an EMP attack. I hope that the story that Dr. Lowry tells in The Satan Legacy is not what's going to happen, because it is just the other side of awful. It is awful enough in 1 second after. But all of this can be prevented. None of this has to happen. All we have to do is to use the technology which is readily available to us to harden our grid and to prepare for this. And I think it is inevitable that one of these 3 things will happen. There will be a cyber attack. There will be a Carrington event. There will be an EMP, a nuclear EMP, one of those. And all 3 of them have essentially the same effect. They bring down the grid. And just think about your life. If you do not have electricity, if there will be no electricity for the next year, what will you do? By the way, if it's an EMP attack, your car is full of computers. They're probably all fried. But we can prepare so that at least the grid doesn't. You might do without your car. It's going to be really tough to do without the grid, isn't it? The House passed a good bill that had EMP in it. When it got to the Senate decided it was going to be too expensive to harden against EMP, so they took it out. If it ends life as you know it, it can't be too expensive to harden, to avoid it, can it? I'm having trouble understanding that logic. And it would end life as you know it. I know there are many out there who have never heard about EMP, and gee, what is this stuff? And are you really being a radical, and are you a member of the lunatic fringe? I will assure you that this is very real, that it can happen, and we need to prepare so that when it happens, we will not be devastated by it. Well, I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for your attention.